Can Tuvalu be saved? As climate change reshapes the world, not just physically, but politically, legally, and even morally, Tuvalu is at the front line. As the sea level rises, it's becoming increasingly uninhabitable with every passing year. But what happens when it passes a critical point and no one can live there anymore? What becomes of that population, its sovereignty, and its entire place in the international community? These are no longer theoretical questions. So, can the country be saved? And if not, what happens to it and the other states facing a fundamental threat to their entire existence? Hello and welcome. I'm James Ker-Lindsay, and here I take an informed look at international relations, conflict, and security. In international relations, countries have historically ceased to exist in three main ways. Most usually, they'd be conquered by another state, although this is no longer a legally accepted form of what we call state extinction. Alternatively, they could voluntarily merge with another country, or thirdly, they disintegrate from within, becoming a collection of new countries. But now, climate change has introduced a terrifying fourth possibility: the complete physical disappearance of a state. Until recently, the idea that a country might vanish due to environmental factors was all but unthinkable. But for low-lying island nations in the Pacific and Indian Oceans, this is fast becoming a likely outcome. Tuvalu is one of the most prominent and most threatened examples. Lying just 4.5 meters or 15 feet above sea level at its highest point, it's already seeing its ability to sustain life rapidly disappearing as land erodes and its fresh water becomes contaminated. And it's all this that's forcing a far broader and more profound question. What does it mean if a state loses its territory due to forces entirely outside of its control? And crucially, what should be done about all this? To understand the situation, we need to understand Tuvalu itself. Located in the Central Pacific, roughly halfway between Australia and the American islands of Hawaii, Tuvalu consists of 3 small islands and 6 atolls that stretch across 600 kilometres of ocean. But while it covers a vast area of sea, its total landmass is tiny. It's just 25 square kilometres, or 9.1 square miles in size. That's about the size of Manhattan. Its population is around 11,000 people, making it the world's smallest country by inhabitants. Predominantly Polynesian, but with a small Micronesian minority, most live on the island of Funafuti, the country's capital. As one might expect, their way of life, traditions, identity, and economy are closely tied to the sea. The main sources of income are fishing licenses, and the islanders who go off to work on cargo ships. However, the ocean, the very source of their survival, now poses the greatest threat of all to the country. In terms of history, the islands were first settled by Polynesians over 3,000 years ago. For centuries, the people of Tuvalu lived in isolation, sustaining themselves through fishing and small-scale agriculture. However, in the 19th century, European explorers began to arrive. As a result, Tuvalu was eventually incorporated into the British Empire, becoming part of what was then called the Gilbert and Ellice Islands. This lasted until the last quarter of the 20th century. As the process of decolonisation drew to a close and Britain considered giving up its final holdings in the Pacific, the cultural and administrative differences between the Gilbert Islands, now known as Kiribati, and the Ellice Islands, now Tuvalu, led to political tensions. To this end, a referendum was held in 1974, which resulted in the two parts separating. And just 4 years later, in 1978, Tuvalu gained full independence. But like neighbouring Australia and New Zealand, the British monarch remains head of state, albeit represented in the country by a Governor-General. As a sovereign state, Tuvalu finally joined the United Nations in 2000, its membership held up for years by an inability to pay the necessary fees. Since then, and despite its tiny size and limited economic power, it's taken an active role in raising awareness about climate change, repeatedly highlighting concerns in international forums and warning of the catastrophic consequences of rising sea levels. But all this has seemingly fallen on deaf ears. As global emissions continue to increase, the country's entire existence is now at risk. The science is clear. Climate change is causing global sea levels to rise due to melting ice sheets and thermal expansion. At present rates, it's expected that the levels will increase by 1 to 2 metres by the end of the century. While this may sound small for countries like Tuvalu, this is a massive amount. More to the point, it's far from being an abstract concern or an issue to be faced at a later date. It's already a daily reality. High tides regularly flood parts of the island and houses and roads are being washed away. At the same time, entire coastlines are disappearing, and meanwhile salt water is contaminating freshwater supplies and making agricultural land unusable. But Tuvalu is certainly not alone. Other low-lying nations, including the Maldives, Kiribati and the Marshall Islands, are also facing similar dangers. Indeed, even larger countries with vulnerable coastal areas, such as Bangladesh and parts of the United States, are beginning to experience the very real effects of rising sea levels. But while many countries can build seawalls or move communities inland, Tuvalu, along with other island nations, has nowhere to go. And this is raising very real questions. I hope you're finding this helpful. If so, please consider giving it a like and perhaps subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. Thanks so much, and now back to the video. Faced with the likelihood of becoming uninhabitable, Tuvalu has already begun exploring a number of unprecedented solutions, ranging from the practical to the seemingly desperate. One of the more extreme proposals is the construction of artificial islands, a step that's already been taken by the Maldives. These would be platforms raised above sea levels that could host future generations of Tuvaluans. The trouble is, this would not only require advanced engineering, it would also need enormous investment, both of which are beyond the means of such a small and impoverished country. Another idea is to purchase land elsewhere. In fact, Tuvalu's leaders have already explored the possibility of buying territory in Australia or New Zealand, either to relocate the population or perhaps even to preserve some sort of state continuity. But all this also raises tricky legal and political issues. For instance, would any country be willing to give up sovereignty over a piece of its territory in order to help them? All things considered, it seems unlikely. A third approach, one that's already in progress, is migration. And this is where Tuvalu has been at the forefront of developments. Under a landmark special arrangement, it struck a deal with Australia to allow up to 280 of its citizens, or roughly 2.5% of its population, to relocate every year. While this offers a safety net for individuals, it does little to preserve Tuvalu as a functioning state. And therein lies the central dilemma. How do you save a nation and not just its people? To address these questions, Tuvalu and others have turned to international law. In 2023, it joined over 100 other countries in requesting an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice, the world's highest court, on the obligations of states to protect the environment and prevent climate change. In July 2025, the ICJ delivered its judgment. In a hugely significant ruling, it said that countries do in fact have a responsibility to protect the environment and can be held liable for climate change. But while the opinion gives new legal weight to the claims of vulnerable nations like Tuvalu and may even open the way for compensation, it won't stop the rising waters in the immediate future. Ultimately, though, Tuvalu and others may become uninhabitable. And it's at that point that a new question will emerge. What will be their new status? Under international law, it's accepted that a settled population and a defined territory is a basic prerequisite of statehood. But what happens when one or both are lost? So far, there's been relatively little discussion about radical innovations in international law, such as creating the idea of a state without territory. But some argue that as long as a government exists and can represent a defined population, even one spread far and wide, it could, at least in theory, continue to be recognised as a state. This could in fact be the case, but it would nevertheless represent a fundamental shift in the way that the international community considers sovereignty and territoriality. Even then, there would be a host of practical questions that would still need to be answered. For example, could such a nation maintain its seat at the United Nations as well as its other legal, political and diplomatic rights, even if it no longer possessed any physical land? And what would happen to Tuvalu's other economic resources, such as its fishing rights and mineral claims? And what about the population scattered across Australia, New Zealand and elsewhere? Would they remain Tuvaluan citizens, and could they vote in elections for a government in exile? While these may all sound like academic questions, they're steadily becoming very real issues to think about. Ultimately, Tuvalu and other similar countries face a dire future. Even in the best case scenario, it may be forced to relocate its population, abandon its territory and reinvent itself as a transnational diaspora nation. Another people without a homeland. But at worst, it may disappear altogether, becoming the first modern state to be erased by climate change. But this, of course, isn't just about Tuvalu. Around the world, hundreds of millions of people live in areas vulnerable to rising sea levels. Cities like Jakarta, Lagos and Miami could well be submerged by the end of the century. And it's for all these reasons that what's happening now in the small Pacific island state of Tuvalu is likely to play out on a much larger scale in the years ahead. But in the meantime, in the here and now, the question facing Tuvalu and its inhabitants is what, if anything, can be done to save them, their country and their identity. I hope you found that useful. If so, here are some more videos that you might find interesting. Thanks so much for watching, and see you in the next video.